I think the list of lessons is huge. And you know, I'm still on the road about half time, and unfortunately, when you do international work, when you go on the road now, you know, it's not back in 3 days. I mean, you don't go to India for, you know, 2 or 3 days and come back. You're stuck there a week or two. So when I'm out there, I think a lot about these kinds of questions, and obviously that's why I have these obsessions about self-sufficiency now that have just become perverse, and a number of other things. I mean, you know, why in the world we didn't charge money for doing taxes or housing counseling, I no longer can justify as a judgment that I was responsible for. I bet in the last year I was there, we did more than 100,000 families in those two categories alone. And had we said to anybody, hey, $25 to do your taxes because this is the way it works, and these people, blah, 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 every one of them would have paid $25. And God knows what we could have charged for housing counseling when at the other end of it was somebody potentially getting a house. But we didn't do it because we thought it was paid for by somebody else, and we didn't think we needed to embed that part of the culture in that kind of exchange. So it's interesting to me because now in the organizing I do elsewhere, everything has a charge. I mean, it's a very transparent operation. Because nothing is funded by anything outside, there has to be a recognition by the membership that here's what something costs. So if this is what you want, you figure out what you want to charge for it, because that's part of the problem. Because, you know, if I were still 21, as I was when I started Acorn, I could say, well, you know, we've got enough time to sort of outrun that stuff. But at my age, I'd really like to see some of it built while I'm still alive, and I'm not at the age where I think I've got another 40 years to see if I could, you know, solve the problems 20 years in. But I think at 3.5, you know, Acorn went under what, November 5th of 2010. We're almost still too soon to really know fully. I think it has to be encouraging to all of you who were leaders and organizers with Acorn that the revision has already begun, that people are more correctly looking at what Acorn did and what it meant, and frankly, as you say, at the void. And part of what I think is the lesson that's being learned, which is wrong, is that people are afraid to do voter registration now. You can't, I mean, I got a call when I got off the plane here in Philadelphia from some reporter in Arizona that says the Attorney General in Arizona, whatever his name might be, has decided that Acorn registered some illegal, undocumented kind of folk sometime in the past. I couldn't tell from the voice message, and he was now going to prosecute Acorn for voter fraud. Well, it would have seemed more appropriate if he was prosecuting a dead organization for registering dead people or something like that. You know. And, you know, and I'm meeting with old members of, new Action United people in Pittsburgh last night at the Action United office. You know, I said at one point that I'd agreed to be interviewed by Fox News about voter suppression. And then this one guy just you must be crazy. And I said, absolutely. No question about it. But here's the problem. We have to, there is no time that I would refuse to be interviewed about whether or not we're willing to stand for democracy as opposed to not standing for democracy. So anytime Fox News, I know they'll chop it up, I know they'll edit it in some screwy way, but give me an opportunity to argue with them for democracy and more democracy and make them argue against democracy. I mean, there's no softer pitch that comes over the plate for you to try to hit than how do you defend. And so I argue, and I have argued for years, and now that I don't have to answer to a membership here in the U.S., I can argue with abandon that we need to have, you know, automatic registration, just like there was, you know, there's no question when you hit 18 still that you get your draft card. I mean, They know how to find you. They know how to send you a registration card. I mean, when I'm talking to our members in Italy about, they were asking about voter ID. They don't get the voter suppression, I understand. Voter IDs, they don't get, because in Italy, when you're born, everybody gets an ID. So they keep missing the issue about that, so you have to, you know, but it's just a scandal that we don't have automatic registration, and I'm very much for mandatory voting, like they have in Australia, like they have in Italy, like they have in Argentina, and almost, you know, half of the countries in Latin America, you have mandatory voting. Sometimes the penalties are minor. In Italy, if you don't vote, you go to the bottom of the list for child daycare. Well, that wouldn't mean much to people in the United States because we don't have child daycare funded by the government. But in other places, in Argentina, the penalties are you're not going to be able to get a driver's license. You're not going to be able to get a passport. You need to, you know, get out there and do your vote thing. And that's the same that's true in Brazil. I mean, people talk about the robust democracy in Brazil. Well, everybody votes in Brazil. So you kind of know a little bit more why the Workers' Party could win in Brazil, or why you still have union rights in Australia. When you start to have everybody able to vote, you're going to have more equity in the voting. So I don't mind embracing that, and the fact that part of the lesson people have learned from what happened to Acorn is, in fact, don't do voter registration. That's a huge gap. And it's not like we're getting away with anything. We're still being blamed for everything. I mean, my kids and Beth used to argue, why, you know, when I left Acorn, why are you still getting Google alerts for Acorn? Well, it's just a fascination, what we're responsible for doing to this day. We are just, even last year, we're still, 25% of the Republicans still believe Acorn stole the election in 2008. And that's an improvement. That's an improvement, because right after the election, you know, something like 60% thought that Acorn stole the election. So, I mean, our numbers are getting lower, but we're still in the game. And we've become sort of the new red nimbus out there of something that, you know, well, Acorn must have done it. This guy, this crazy guy, Chris Kovach, who wrote all that, is writing most of this voter suppression legislation, wrote a huge amount of the, you know, Arizona bill, and a number of the other states, you know, anti-immigrant bills. He ran, you know, I went to Harvard, I went to Oxford. He ran because he had to, for Secretary of State, the first campaign, because he had to stop what Acorn was doing in Kansas in terms of registering voters. Well, the truth is, Craig, you probably know this, I mean, we didn't have a pot to pee in Kansas. You know, when I left, I know, and I don't think it got better after I left. So you would have had to go house to house looking for somebody with an Acorn button in Kansas. And so the notion that somehow he was able to build a robust political career off of going after, you know, going into the hole, into the caves with sticks and brooms and finding an acorn and rooting it out of Kansas and making sure they can't do this voter fraud. And some of the bitch is still running on that. I got Google Alerts, you know. And so, but there is no, hey, you know, there is no, I hate to tell you, there is no Acorn in Kansas. You know, that's not the way it works. And yet this is part of what I think is a chilling effect for organizing. So whether or not the new organizations and their bases or whatever are learning that what you need to do from Acorn is go to your base, stand up, and then band together, I don't know if that's what people are learning. I don't get the feeling that there's a lot of, hey, you know, next time somebody's attacked, let's all band together. You know, it's still more of, you know, vulnerable, touchy, let's see what hole we can crawl in and hope it doesn't really hit us. So, and that's just wrong. So I could go on, but
so
I'm going to answer yours, and then Don, you had your hand up before, you know.
Yeah, go ahead, Stan. Just, you know, a lot of the organizations, I think, are now developing close alliances with labor, which they didn't have before, at least in my recollection of before and now. So I'm just wondering what you think of that. Whether there's a dependency relationship developing, which is healthy or not healthy, what do you expect?
Well, I think for Acorn, labor was always a tradition.